Okay, I think it's going. Right. Hello, Year 8. It's Miss Pearce and Miss O'Dowd, who are going to be talking you through some key ideas in the Tempest. And as we've been looking at this week, we're going to be thinking about whether Caliban is a likeable character and the ideas that he presents in the play. Okay, so Miss Pearce, you want to start off then with your views on the Tempest and whether you think that it's still relevant today?
I definitely think that it is relevant. I think there is so much that you can discuss. There's so many themes that we're going to look at. Caliban's a really, really important one because he definitely shows the idea of the other and people being treated differently for things that they can't really help themselves. So you could think about things like the way that Caliban is described through his appearance. He's kind of made to feel to the audience that he is different, he is something to be feared, I suppose. And I think you could apply that quite a lot to what's going on, like quite currently in the news, kind of the fear of things that are different to what you're used to. Whether Shakespeare was doing that on purpose, we don't really know, but I think that's definitely a topic that is relevant to now, I think.
And I think, so when I was at school, I personally really struggled with Shakespeare, and I felt a bit disengaged with the language that was being used, and I didn't really understand at that point when I was a student kind of what impact it would have on my life. But it's only as I've sort of got older that I realised how important his plays are. And for me personally, I find them so interesting because you can map so many different themes, as you were saying, throughout history, throughout culture. So even though these plays are written in the Jacobean period, the stories are so universal and so current in so many ways and mapped into our society today that we kind of see these ongoing patterns with people and humanity. So like what we've been saying with Caliban, a character created and constructed in a play, 400 years ago, yet we're still talking about him today and in a very sort of relevant and new way, like we're doing with linking with Black Lives Matter and this idea that there were many different people who were overpowered and colonized by those in authority and positions of power. So for me, I think why the Tempest is so relevant today is because it deals with that overwhelming theme of power and thinking about how power falls into different hands, how people are jealous of others' power, and where the power lies. So, Miss Pearce, where do you feel that power lies, and what's your sort of opinion on that?
I think it's a really important theme in the Tempest. I mean, I think people could argue well, Shakespeare didn't really intend it to be about colonization, and he was just writing about some characters and just a play that he thought would be interesting. He wasn't necessarily trying to make a statement about that, because you could say that it's kind of, he was a little bit before some of those things. So I think power's important. He's just trying to establish the idea that someone like Prospero, he's just trying to create fear. I suppose he uses magic as a way of trying to terrify Caliban a little bit and try and make him submissive, which I think is interesting. There's so many power dynamics in the play as a whole, not just Prospero and Caliban, I suppose.
Yeah. No, and I think I was going to say, I think as well, and I discussed it with my class, also power in terms of gender, and looking to see how Miranda is the only female character really discussed in the play, and how her voice often is silenced by the men that seem to have greater power over her. And often Prospero talks about her as his possession, as his prize, as though he has the capability to control her, as though she is like an object, and how that therefore echoes ideas surrounding kind of the treatment of women at the time. But then we also see her in another light as a sort of a stronger character when she's talking with Ferdinand, and we see that he's struggling to pick up the logs, and therefore she kind of interacts with the situation and really makes him look quite silly. She's able to easily sort of, use them as resources, and he's just kind of like, oh, she can do that. So I think there are so many comments on power, and I think there's always this dynamic between, the one that's the inferior and the superior, and then the inferior. So I think there's lots of tropes that we can see with slavery and imprisonment and that objectification of people as well.
Yeah, it's interesting with characters like Miranda, because she is born on the island, so you could say like she doesn't really have any concept of like the outside world. All of it comes from Prospero. And it's kind of the same with Caliban, that he is from that island. So these people sort of come to them and then kind of apply this power, and they kind of don't really understand. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and then it comes down as well to power through language. So we learn that Caliban, to begin with, wasn't a native speaker, and we can see that his language is quite clunky and quite jarring at the beginning of the play. And then he even says to Prospero himself that he says, "You taught me language and my profit on it." So that's how he knows how to curse back, because he's been educated by the superior Prospero in how to speak and how to curse, and he's picked up on those darker ideas that we see within Prospero. So I think it kind of makes us now question about Caliban's character, and is he deserving of kind of a negative opinion? What do you think?
It's interesting that most of the opinions that we get of Caliban are just from like everyone else, because it's a play. There's no like description of what Caliban looks like. We kind of get that from everybody else. So they're saying that he's like a dog, or he's like a monster, trying to create this impression that he's kind of like a savage, I suppose, something like to be feared. So it's interesting in that way, because you could feel sympathetic for him in that respect, but there's other reasons why you might not feel sympathetic for him. So he's definitely a character you can debate about, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the way that Caliban is presented, and the way that he almost becomes a bit of a laughing stock, particularly with the moment and the four-legged monster. And, he's up to a lot of, abuse by the audience, really, as we kind of think, oh, he physically looks different. He's made a bit of a mockery of. However, I think in doing that, it could be asking the audience to kind of consider themselves, how they deal with individuals, with situations that are considered different, and actually maybe it's a commentary on us and our understanding of difference, and criticizing us as an audience, that just because he looked different and is associated with like comic ideas in the play doesn't mean that he's any less of a character, because actually we soon learn, well, towards the end of the play, how he is a poetic and thoughtful character, and he has great appreciation for the island. And we also see how the things that he picks up on in terms of his ideas and the cursing against Prospero, and wants that revenge, comes from the fact that he's learned that from his master. So it's kind of like he's been taught and educated these ways, rather than perhaps feeling them to begin with.
Yeah, I think the end is interesting as well, that it's kind of left a bit open-ended for Caliban, whereas like Ariel is released, but Caliban, it's a bit, we don't really know what's going to happen to him. So it kind of makes you consider, well, what's the difference between Caliban and Ariel, if they're essentially both Prospero's slaves or servants? How come Caliban's is kind of left a bit open, whereas Ariel was set free? So
I agree, and I find it really lovely in a way. We can see how enthusiastic and passionate he is about the island, and some people might argue that he's only demonstrating those qualities because he wants to be sort of the ruler of it. But I think it's more than that. I think he just he does see it as his native home, and he does want it to be looked after and treasured. And it was just going to lead me on to another idea about the way that the Tempest is still relevant today, because I remember when I was at university, I had this really inspiring lecturer who probably brought Shakespeare to life a bit more for me as a student. And he, in his ideas, he basically kind of told us that he felt that Shakespeare was all about kind of entering this sort of magical space where lots of different things happen. So you've got, you know, spirits that are wandering around, you've got, you know, different genders trying on different identities. So much happens in all of Shakespeare's plays because it is this form of escapism, and therefore it's almost like, as an audience, you participate by going to see Shakespeare in the theatre, or, you know, acted out, and that is your own form of escapism before that you and have that enjoyment and entertainment, and then go back to the normal world. So I think I picked up on some of that with the language, and we see Sebastian commenting on how he says, "Now I believe that there are unicorns," and I feel that there are lots of ideas picked up within the Tempest between sleeping, dreaming, imagining, like magic. And yeah, so for me, it's kind of like being entertained and taken to this different imaginative world that in our normal lives we don't have access to, because we have a certain cycle about how we go about living and daily life for most people. So I always find that interesting.
Yeah, and you can say the same, like the whole dream idea, like Midsummer Night's Dream and sleeping, and that's such an accessible play as well. Like, it is just meant to kind of be good fun as well. Like, there is lots you can explore in the Tempest, but it is the Tempest and Midsummer Night's Dream, like the comedies, they are kind of like escapism, like something to just kind of enjoy, which is still things we have today, I suppose.
And when I was also reading as well, there was a talk about how, even though the Tempest, we discuss it as being a romantic comedy, do you feel that there are elements of it where it could go down a more tragic path, and what saves it from that?
More tragic in perhaps with Miranda, in a sense. A lot of sympathy for her, kind of not knowing anything other than the island, I suppose. Yeah, tragic in the theme of like slavery with Caliban and Ariel. Yeah, there's a lot of tragedy in there as well. I think that's what Shakespeare is really good at. Like, on the outside, it kind of looks a bit fun, but if you look a little bit deeper as well, there are definitely some darker themes to explore too.
Yeah, and it's like, well, within most of his plays, he does the contrasts between kind of the happiness and the loving side, and the darker and more tragic side so well. And that's kind of reflective of human life, really. Like, you're always going to have those moments of happiness and optimism and lightness, and how that then conflicts with the darkness as well. So yeah, I totally agree. I think there are kind of what could be very tragic moments, you know, as you've already said, with Caliban. But I think ultimately the fact that the ending, we do see Ferdinand and Miranda get married, so there's that celebration. We see Prospero, who also is kind of holds a mirror up to himself and realizes how he is to be blamed for what he's been doing, and how he vows to change. So I think whilst we go through this sort of challenging journey of the characters, by the end of it, yeah, there is that sense of hope, I guess, to conclude the play. Great. So we'll leave our discussion there, and we're moving on to what thing are we doing next week? We'll do
the environment.
Pardon?
Is it the environment?
Yes, yeah, we're going to do the environment next week, and be discussing how the island is instrumental in that, and linking with some more topical pieces of work of the time as well. Okay, thank you, Miss Pearce.
Thank you.
And we look forward to your thoughts and reflections. Bye-bye.
Bye.